Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. Before we dive into today's discussion on payroll compliance across borders, I'm thrilled to introduce our expert speakers who bring deep industry insights and hands-on experience to the table. First up, we have Anita. Anita is a globally recognized expert in payroll, HR, and the future of work. With many years of experience at advising multinational companies, she is a leading voice in navigating the complexities of global workforce management. If you've read any of her insights on payroll trends, she brings a sharp, forward-thinking perspective to discussion like this. Thank you so much, Anita, for joining this session.
Thank you for the invitation, and hello, everyone.
And next up, we have Michael. Michael leads the product vision here at Multiplier. He's been shaping innovative payroll solutions that help businesses scale globally with ease. With an extensive experience in payroll tech, he understands the real-world challenges of multi-country payroll and how automation and compliance-driven platforms can solve them. So I think today he'll walk us through the technology behind making global payroll seamless and compliant. Thank you for joining, Michael.
Yeah, thank you for the intro, and thank you for everyone attending. Excited to talk about some compliance stuff, so it should be fun.
Anita, so the first question I have is for you, right? So as the title describes, managing payroll across multiple countries feels like navigating a global minefield of sorts. Like every country has its own set of ever-changing rules, right? So in fact, I even read a recent survey that said 63% of companies struggle with compliance, right? That's a staggering number. What do you think on the primary compliance challenges companies face when managing payroll across multiple countries?
It is, like you mentioned, every country is different. Different labor laws, different tax regimes, different pay legislation. And that means that when you want to pay people correctly and timely, which are typically two requirements that you have to satisfy in order not to get very unhappy employees, you have to know what you're dealing with. And not only for the country where you have your largest employee volume, but it's the same amount of work for the companies where you just employ one or two people and have to pay them. It's often changing. It can be very specific. It can be super detailed. And often it deals with concepts that are very normal to the local population, but that can be very strange to people who do not sit inside that country. For instance, I'm from the Netherlands. We bike a lot, so we have opportunities to charge some of the bicycle costs back to an employer. I don't think a lot of countries will have, similar regulations. If you do not live in that country, you do not understand very well why that is, how that works, and the bicycle permit law is not very specific, so you can easily learn that. But laws, for instance, around how we deal with illnesses, how we deal with sick days, with special leaves because of bereavement or other stuff like that, can sometimes be very difficult. If you operate in 20 countries, that's complexity times 20. So that tells you a little bit what the challenge around compliance is. And like I mentioned, just because you have one or two employees in a country does not mean you do not need to learn and understand and apply all those laws. So that is the complexity behind compliance.
In fact, to add to that, right, so non-compliance to these laws also sort of affect your company's reputation, because for example, right, there's been a recent event where a global company was accused of underpaying more than 1,000 employees and roughly around 8 million due, right? And these were primarily due to payroll miscalculation errors. And what lessons can we learn from such incidents, right? And how can companies prevent similar issues from happening in the future?
Yeah, look, payroll is an operational process. There's a lot of changes, a lot of data changes that go in every single month, especially if You have people on hourly wages, for instance. They need to be recalculated every single month or every single time period from 0 up until whatever people get paid. If you make a mistake, that happens. But if you make a similar mistake for all of your employees, and it's a big mistake, that usually ends up in the newspaper. And with employers being concerned about their employee reputation, wanting to be known in the market as a good employer or an employer of choice, you want to avoid that as much as possible. And there's a second part of why you want to try to avoid that. If you make a mistake, that sometimes can come with very costly fines. If you do not pay taxes right for a period of time, once you find that out, you not only have to pay back taxes, but typically also a fine because you did not pay the correct amount for a certain period of time that is too long. And so that means that payroll mistakes can have a dual effect. Externally, it can be costly and it is reputation. But more importantly, internally, when you continue to make mistakes in your employees' wages or salaries, they will leave. They will pack up and leave. That is how we've looked at that time and time again, but that is always the result.
Yeah, and just to add on that a little bit, just one other piece of this is, previously I've worked in small business payroll, and one thing that happens is it's often easier to be non-compliant. And so that's why it's so important to have the right partnerships, whether it's consultants or your accountants or whoever that can give you that expertise, because like probably the most common error that's made is that people are misclassified as contractors versus employees. And it's very, very common in the US. It's very common internationally as well. And it's always easier to hire a contractor. It's just much, much easier. So when you're starting a business, or even if you're an established business going into a new country, that's how you want to start because it's easier. But that's why you need to have those partners around you that can help you navigate and understand the risks of going that route versus maybe going a full employment route and making the right choice for your organization.
We're talking about multiple countries and multiple local labor tax laws, and for one company to keep track of all of this, like how can technology as a weapon help in streamlining it or simplifying it, for the lack of better word, and keeping track of all of these compliance challenges and not catching off guard, not catching all of these changes off guard?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that. Like, I think one thing, just to add a little bit of additional context to what Anita was saying, not only is that your organization may not be like staffed to like know the understanding of all these different countries, but actually, even if you want to invest in that, we're having a huge talent shortage in payroll. A lot of the payroll expertise is aging out. And people are not coming into this industry. And so this is creating a huge risk for especially mid-market and larger companies that actually want to hire people but can't find them. And so partnerships are going to become more and more important. Consultants are going to become more and more important. And obviously what you choose for your technology is going to be probably one of the most critical decisions you make when you go global with your organization. And really the things that you should be looking at are, traditionally, this has been something where you've had to manage a portfolio of countries and you were dealing with multiple providers. And that can be very difficult to manage. You're kind of always beholden to have the experience for your organization that's equal to the worst provider you have a lot of times. And so that can be really limiting when you're trying to provide a good employee experience to your workforce, and also be competitive in a market where most of the developed world's population is shrinking and you need to acquire talent. So I think like the big things are finding that partner that not only is going to provide you access to a single, basically a hub for all of your countries, but also that will provide you that assistance and guidance on when you should be doing employer of record or doing contractor, or as we call agency of record, or when you should be doing global payroll, what makes sense for your organization when, and helping you through that that decision-making process as you expand your business globally. And then I think the second piece is who's going to give you the service you need so that you don't have to manage all of these different local providers yourself on your own. A lot of times you're having to manage these relationships directly with the local providers, and that can be very difficult to deal with. And also it creates communication issues with your aggregator a lot of times, because they don't really know what's going on sometimes because you're talking directly to the local provider. And so it's really about finding that partner, and of course, it is a multiplier session. Of course, we offer all of this at our company, but, there are options out there that will allow you to do this. And it's just about finding the one that's going to provide you with really great customer service, and then also provide you the technology that will give you that single hub, I think.
We're also talking about payroll data, which is also very sensitive information, right? Sensitive employee information or an individual information, right? So there are obviously, and with whatever is happening right now, most of the payroll specialists in the session would understand that most of us work on spreadsheets, right? So spreadsheet is, or some other variations of that is where we sort of manage and calculate that. So what are the biggest security risks do you think are there when they're managing global payroll and such solution? And how does someone like Multiplier or similar platform help these businesses protect themselves and the company's information?
Yeah, so when you're looking for a provider, and Multiplier definitely handles all this, but I think some of the things you need to look out for, what we have seen and what I have seen historically as our biggest fraud events are your admins protected correctly? You don't want people creating fake payrolls with a bunch of fake employees on it that are going to get paid out. Do they have fraud detection that will be able to see adverse or unusual activities? Things like if there's a lot of prepaid debit cards being paid at once, like is a very specific example, or if there's just like a lot of bulk imported employees out of nowhere. These are things that you can identify as fraud events and things that a lot of payroll companies, including ourselves, look at. And then I think those are like the catastrophic fraud events that I would say. So making sure you have two-factor authentication, proper security throughout the product, which we have. But the other thing too is the employee level is really critical as well. And I think one of the debates that clients are going to need to make upon themselves is some clients don't want to do two-factor authentication with their members. This is becoming less and less of an issue, but it still is with some companies a problem. But two-factor is something that's really needed for employees as well, for something as sensitive as payroll data, because what can happen is if someone is to compromise their account, they can just change the debit information and get themselves paid with your paycheck versus the person who actually should be getting paid. So that's a really common fraud event that can happen if you don't have 2FA set up, versus where if you do have it set up through the phone, that event is almost impossible to happen because you're going to have your phone to authenticate. So I think those are some of the major events that you'll see. With year-end forms, there's also some additional fraud. I don't know how common it is outside the US. I don't think it is as common.
No.
But in the US, there's a big business around stealing W-2s for tax returns, because most Americans get a tax refund because they don't earn enough money, unfortunately. And so that is a big fraud vector as well. So having proper authentication and protections around that as well is really important. And then one other vector I would say that you can always look at, but I think is fairly well handled, fortunately, is whenever you're integrating between systems, you just got to make sure that those integrations are encrypted and secure. With local providers, even a lot of them have modernized at least that aspect of their business. So this shouldn't be too much of a risk, but I would definitely recommend as part of your evaluation to look at SOC 2 audits or anything like that around how they're sharing data with other companies. Like I said, if they're using a Workday integration, this stuff is out of the box. Same with SAP, Oracle, but it's just something to keep in mind, especially if you're working with smaller HR vendors. It's just something to look at for sure.
in fact, that gives me an interesting segue to the next part, right? So we were talking about compliance challenges, and Michael mentioned the associated fraud that could happen with lack of security and all of that. So besides fraud there, right? So another major challenge today, typically for a payroll specialist or a payroll employee, is that there are a lot of payroll mistakes that could happen, right, manually or otherwise, right? And it could be quite costly, right? The payroll mistakes could range from anything like miscalculating the taxes to misclassifying the workers. There is a very broad spectrum, right? And what are the common payroll mistakes do you think, Anita, that you've seen, and how much do they actually cost businesses?
I've seen a lot of different payroll errors, because if you're implementing payroll, if you are changing one payroll to the other, you always run into situations where, you know, the former payroll provider has done something, or the in-house payroll organization has done something where you think, what's going on here? So it can be anything. It can be simple, you know, typos. That happens a lot. Forget a zero, add a zero. Those types of putting people in the wrong tax brackets. Just like you mentioned, not giving people all the benefits that they are entitled to. That also happens a lot. Or you, especially with hourly wages, people not getting all the hours that they are entitled to, or the wrong type of overtime is calculated, so people get too much or not enough. And I have to say that not in all those cases, the payroll departments that I have worked with were able to spot those mistakes. And now you could say that is costly to businesses, but it is, I would say, 50% of the time also very costly to the worker, especially if you don't catch it.
What should companies be doing, Anita, to catch these payroll errors before they become legal nightmares?
Yeah. So I would say there's three different ways in which you can address this. First, there's process. Instead of having what Michael just mentioned, just one payroll admin doing everything and potentially typing in the wrong bank account and then moving money into their own bank accounts. You should adopt 4 I's principles on everything that is financial. I think that is an accepted standard across the world. The person who enters the data cannot commit it or approve it. So someone else needs to do that, preferably someone that is not in the same team, not reports into this person, sits outside of that department. So if you separate those duties, you catch a lot of the problems. Then you have reports. Now there's really simply reports that you can run, comparing 1 month over the other, one pay period to the other, and then looking at everything individually that is over a 5% difference or a 10% difference, or whatever difference you want to define as a company. Those have been run for a very long time, and they work perfectly, I would say.
So a couple things on the third item, which she said automation and AI. I think like mainly workflows and change management is where I think a lot of problems come in. So even a new hire is a change management thing, right? You're hiring a new employee. So there's really 3 things. There's a new hire event, there's qualifying life events. So that's any change that happens with an employee. Could be having a kid, could be getting married, could be getting a promotion. That's really a qualifying life event too. I know that's not maybe how it's exactly defined, but they're all just changes, right? And then there's termination or offboarding that happens, right? So those are like 3 main buckets that happen with change. And really where I see a lot of manual process be done in HR stack and teams is they'll have, I think I've seen dozens of mid-market and small enterprise companies where they'll have a spreadsheet where it shows like this change came in and did this person do X, did this person do Y, did this person do Z, and they have things assigned to those users. And so I think that's something that's going to continue to come more and more into the product via workflows and stuff like that. And also through like HRIS integrations.
Anita mentioned a couple of very good pointers, right? So she mentioned about the maker checker for the approvals and automation that is involved, right? So I have a question here. So more than these, right? Another common payroll mistake, if I may, is also the currency fluctuations or exchange rates that happen, right? And that's going to happen on a daily basis, and particularly when you're dealing with multi-country payroll. So how can someone use, so how does Multiplier, for example, help solve it for these businesses who are dealing with multi-country payroll?
Yeah, so I think the decision there always is when you're doing global payroll, which is really interesting because it's not really a decision you ever see in the United States with payroll, is do you perform your own money movement or not? And by money movement, I mean funding of the payroll and then the payout to the employees, right? Those two actions. Where you've seen some sensitivity historically is that with foreign exchange rates, sometimes companies, especially really, really large ones, will want to keep that money movement in-house, right? And what I would generally say is at this point in time, with the modernization of fintech platforms and just our ability to, integrate with banks in a better way and a more efficient way, we can provide a lot of the similar rates that these competitor kind of bank services can do directly. And so what you're seeing is more and more companies, even very large ones, are just going, you know what, we'll have the local provider, not the local provider, but the payroll provider just manage the FX on their side. And what that does is it greatly streamlines their processes and automation. And the cost difference is, I think, in most regards, unless you're at massive scale, more than easily negated by the efficiencies you see from an operational and manual process standpoint. And then the only other thing to note too is it's all automated, which lowers the risk of there being a banking error. Which, if in terms of banking error, that means the employee doesn't get paid, which is about the worst case event you can have in payroll. And so, I think in terms of looking at the pros and cons, I think in 99% plus of cases, I think it makes sense for companies to look at doing FX directly through the payroll provider, unless they're just providing like egregiously poor rates. But why would they, right? It's not in their interest to do that, and that's what their customers are seeking. And competitively, they have to provide competitive rates. So I would definitely say that we should be able to handle all of that for you automatically, so Multiplier should be able to handle that for you.
Absolutely. And another interesting thing that Anita also brought up was about the AI, right? And let's address the elephant in the room. Everyone's talking about AI in every different industry, right? Particularly with payroll and payroll automation, right? Where do you think AI is going to come in, and what sort of a revolution, if at all, there isn't a better word, how would it sort of influence the way we do payroll?
Yeah, so I'd say like two of the major areas payroll related that I think it's going to come up a lot, and I know Anita works in this space, is around like pay transparency and pay fairness. I think that there is a huge opportunity for AI to help determine who should be paid fairly, like whose pay should be adjusted so that the market's more fair within your organization.
Right.
I think that's a huge opportunity, and I think you'll see that happen over time. One thing that is blocking that a little bit is the access to data. All AI needs lots of data to make its assessments and determinations. And a lot of the payroll companies have been pretty closed about sharing that data due to security reasons and also other reasons. But I think that we will see more openness of that over time, and we'll see opportunities to get better at that come up. I think the main one that we'll see from a direct payroll processing standpoint is the ability to kind of supplement your compliance awareness via like a pseudo AI advisor tool, which you can use to kind of be presented alerts, concerns, risks that are out there based on models that are being trained on what the statutes and laws are saying, based on what like legal letters and definitions from like publications like Walters Kluwer or CCH, things like this. They bring those things in to go, okay, well, it looks like based on this person may be misclassified, or based on this person's not getting paid enough to be above minimum wage when you mix all their rates together or do a weighted average. There's lots of different things it could catch, but essentially that's, I think, the big opportunity that we'll start seeing get rolled out in a lot of products, including ours, over the next 12 months.
Anita, the next question is more or less about you, right? So we're talking about the future, and like you'll be the best person to answer this, right? But at the present, what's changing, right? If you asked me 4 years ago, we wouldn't have predicted this, right? Most of the companies are trying to go remote and encourage remote first employees, right? And with this coming in, there has been an innate way in which we do payroll, and most of that has been based on in-person or in-office sort of work environment, right? But payroll laws aren't exactly designed for this new reality in that sense, right? What do you think are the major compliance risks that we should be watching out for with respect to paying a global force remotely?
When you look at what is currently happening is compared to 4 years ago, Maruti, as you just mentioned, you see that there are more and more different ways in how we employ people, and therefore also how we pay people.
Right.
And you could say we have employees and we have contractors, and then we have like 25 different things in between. And that is because people are becoming more flexible, employers are becoming more flexible. And so this whole relationship that was either fixed with employees or very loose with contractors is now any combination thereof. And you also see that, for instance, full-time jobs are a little bit changing. Not everyone wants to work full-time anymore. But also people are hedging their bets a little bit in the sense that they work for one employer and for another. So if one fires them, they still have an income from the other one, because they have learned that, even permanent employment is not so secure anymore. We hear a lot about layoffs in January and February. With that comes more complexity.
Right.
And with that, and Michael mentioned earlier, we don't see a lot of new payroll professionals come into the profession. And so that means that we will need to think about what people in payroll absolutely have to do, what we can leave to technology, and what we can leave to AI and automation. And I think the truth of the matter is that if you work for a company that is not in payroll, there will not be the budget to invest in all of that. So ultimately, you will have to think about how you are going to pay people if you are unable to get payroll professionals in-house. And a lot of the clients that I work with are actually going through this, I would say, dilemma. Can we still find people who do that? How long will we be able to retain them? Can we offer them a career? Probably not. You also have this phenomenon where people quickly move in and out departments. So I do a project at finance, do a project at payroll. Well, guess what? You cannot just do a project at payroll. You need to actually, learn this over a number of years. And payroll providers, payroll vendors, or companies like Multiplier can actually offer these people a career.
Right.
And so I'm seeing this trend where more and more of my clients are starting to think about the future. 3 to 5 years out, will I still be able to do that all in-house, or do I need to find something else? And even if they think, well, for this location, this is my headquarter location, I can still do this in-house, they're not so sure about all, I would say, the smaller locations, outside of the country, but sometimes also inside of the country. If the country is large enough, and if there are a lot of different legislations between states and different tax regimes. So I see a lot of movement there, and I know that you asked me about AI, but this is not necessarily tied to AI. So I hope that I gave the right answer.
Of course, and also this will be your accountant's equivalent of learning a tool, right? For example, in an Indian context, right? So whenever there is an accountant who's graduated, more than learning the basics, right, he'll be taught to learn a specific solution like an SAP or a Tally that's very local, right? So that sort of gives them an edge over the next person who's not done that, right? So, and tools like Multiplier is going to help that particular person like make payroll the career much more seamless and easier for him. And that brings me to the last question, Michael.
So I think this is a very challenging problem to deal with because so there's kind of two directions the industry is going. One is like, hey, let's build a best of breed solution, right, for a subset of the HR and payroll needs that your organization has. And then the other path is, hey, let's build all of it and be what's called an all-in-one, right?
Right.
And what you're seeing, with the exception of, I'd say, maybe Workday, is a lot of the all-in-ones are not friendly to integrations when they are in similar product lines.
Right.
So when you are trying to integrate with General Ledger, they're totally okay with that because they're like, okay, well, this isn't our core business, so UKG or whoever will allow that to happen. They'll have lots of robust integrations in that area. But if you went to UKG and said, hey, I would like to use ADP or Multiplier, they would not let you do that. They're like, no, you can't do that with us. Or if you're with a company like, I won't call out a different company here, but with a lot of all-in-ones, if you said, hey, I want to use a different time and attendance vendor, they would be like, no, you have to use ours. And theirs may not work for you.
Right.
And so it creates this really interesting challenge where not only do you have to look at, can my company integrate, one, technology-wise, do they want to integrate? That's the second big question, because they may not want to integrate with the people you want to integrate with. And then three, the people that you want them to integrate to, are they amenable to being integrated with that vendor? And so when you're trying to choose vendors and trying to build out your HR portfolio, you have to think about all these things and go, who plays nice with who? Now, like I said, Workday doesn't care if ADP does their payroll or if Multiplier does their payroll. Like, we have an integration with Workday. But there are a lot of vendors where that's not the case. And so I think, like with integrations, you have to find that the vendors are playing nice with each other at the very top level. And then at that point, then you can start looking at, okay, technology-wise, what are they actually integrating? And from a payroll perspective, very specifically, there's tons of integrations that you can do in HR. But in terms of just payroll, the big ones that you need to look at are, how is my system of record going to come over into payroll? Now, maybe the payroll system like Multiplier, we have an HRIS system, but maybe you don't want to use that. Maybe you want to use Workday or Bamboo HR, SAP SuccessFactors. Can they bring the right data into payroll and not create syncing issues where the data is going to be consistent? That's one of the big ones. And then coming back out, you need to also integrate with back into the HRIS potentially, pay slips, year-end forms, and your payroll data, because they may want to unify that over in their headquartered system, right? So those are all things that you need to see if they can integrate back into your kind of core HR system. And then the other integrations that are kind of separate that you also should look at are benefits and retirement plans. Like, are those being integrated correctly coming out of payroll into the providers? So like the brokers or, whoever, like Principal or Fidelity in the US for 401k. And then General Ledger is the other big one, right? Are the General Ledger pieces coming into from payroll into my accounting system. And then one other one I would just call out very specifically, time is critical with payroll. And so time and attendance data, a lot of that times it could come from the core HR system, but it could be coming from a completely different system. It could be coming from Deputy or attendance on demand. That is a key integration that you should be looking at and making sure that is being addressed appropriately when you're assessing who you're going with from a global payroll standpoint, because there are a lot of times where that gets missed and then implementation, it blows up. So you just really want to make sure you vet that when you're looking for kind of the right portfolio partners to work with.
Great. So, and actually that brings us to the end of the session. We're about time. But I think there are some questions coming in, but since due to the interest of time, we'll address it separately. We'll get your quotes on it and we'll probably reach out to them separately and get that done. Thank you so much, Anita and Michael, for making time, and this was a very useful session. We'll probably take in one last question before we sort of wrap this session, so that we make it so we know that we address something, right? So we have one question here from Amit, who said, do we know of a cost-effective VMS tool which integrates all major components of contract management, say requirement management, payroll integration, leave and benefit record maintenance, and to end with the reporting module and all wrapped in one?
Should I answer that? I mean, we can handle a lot of this stuff at Multiplier. Actually, I think we can handle all of it. The only one I'm not sure about is what we mean by contract management. But I think that generally we should be able to handle all your contract needs, payroll needs, leave needs, benefits needs. We can also even manage unstructured time data. We do have some policy management, do break, overtime, stuff like that. And then on reporting, we have ability to create reports as well. You know, we're still always improving our product, but we should be able to meet like the core needs in all those areas, I would say.
So I think, Amit, you have your answer here. You've joined the right place, because we currently have an answer for you. Yeah, so we'll reach out to you, or feel free to reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do for that, right? And that brings us to that concludes our webinar. But thank you both of you for taking your time out of your busy schedule and making a meaningful session out of this. Would love to have some sort of an engagement in the future as well.